Hello everyone! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'm a former forensic pathology assistant at Riverside County Medical Examiner's Office in California. Or at least I was until I submitted my resignation 3 months ago. You can call me Sarah Mitchell if you want, though most people in the morgue just called me Mitch during my 8 years there. I've seen everything you can imagine in forensic pathology, natural deaths, accidents, homicides, suicides, and every kind of trauma the human body can endure. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about death and ultimately led me to leave the profession entirely. Riverside County Medical Examiner's Office is one of the busiest facilities in Southern California, handling over 4,000 cases per year. It's a modern building constructed in 2009 with state-of-the-art equipment and a staff of experienced forensic pathologists, investigators, and technicians. During my time there, I worked primarily day shifts, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., because I preferred the routine and the collaborative atmosphere when the full team was present. Day shifts in a medical examiner's office are predictable in their unpredictability. You might process routine natural deaths for hours, then suddenly have 3 homicide victims arrive simultaneously, each requiring immediate attention and meticulous documentation. The morning of March 8, 2023 started like any other. I arrived at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes early as was my habit, and began reviewing the overnight log. We had 4 new cases that had come in during the night shift. An elderly man who died peacefully in his sleep, a traffic accident victim from the 91 freeway, a woman who had suffered a heart attack at her home, and one case that immediately caught my attention because of the unusual circumstances noted by the investigator. Adult female, approximately 28 to 32 years old, found deceased in her apartment by a concerned neighbor who hadn't seen her in several days. No signs of foul play, no obvious cause of death, but the scene investigator had noted some peculiarities that warranted a thorough examination. What struck me first was the investigator's handwriting. Detective Maria Santos had been working death scenes for over 15 years, and I had never seen her write notes that seemed rushed or uncertain. But this report contained multiple crossed-out sections, question marks in places where there should have been definitive observations, and a final note that simply said, "Recommend immediate autopsy. Something doesn't feel right about this case." I was assigned to assist Dr. Jonathan Reed with the preliminary examination and autopsy preparation. Dr. Reed had been the chief medical examiner for 12 years and had a reputation for being methodical, thorough, and completely unflappable. In all my time working with him, I'd never seen him express uncertainty or confusion about a case before we began the examination process. But when he read Detective Santos's report that morning, I noticed him pause longer than usual and reread certain sections multiple times. The body arrived at 8:30 a.m. in a standard transport bag from the scene. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s with shoulder-length brown hair and what would have been an athletic build. She was wearing simple pajamas, a white cotton t-shirt, and blue flannel pants, suggesting she had died during the night in her own bed. But as we began the external examination, I started to notice details that didn't align with the typical presentation of someone who had died peacefully in their sleep. Her skin had an unusual pallor that went beyond normal post-mortem changes. It wasn't the typical gray or bluish tint we see in deceased individuals, but rather an almost translucent quality that made her appear ethereal, as if she were made of porcelain rather than flesh. Her fingernails and toenails were perfectly manicured with no signs of struggle, defensive wounds, or any indication that she had experienced distress before death. Most remarkably, there was no rigor mortis present despite the investigator's report indicating she had been deceased for at least 48 hours. "That's unusual," Dr. Reed commented as he tested the flexibility of her joints. "At this point, we should be seeing significant rigidity." I had assisted with hundreds of examinations, and Dr. Reed was right to be puzzled. Rigor mortis typically begins within 2 to 6 hours after death and reaches maximum stiffness between 12 and 24 hours. After 48 hours, the body should either still be rigid or beginning to show signs of decomposition as the rigor starts to dissipate. This woman showed neither. We continued the external examination, documenting every detail with photographs and measurements. Her body temperature had equilibrated with the ambient temperature of the morgue, which was normal. But when we moved her to position her for the internal examination, something happened that I had never experienced in 8 years of forensic work. As I lifted her arm to reposition it, her eyes opened. Not the reflexive eye opening that can sometimes occur when bodies are moved due to muscle contractions or settling of tissues. Her eyes opened slowly, deliberately, and she looked directly at me with the clearest, most vivid green eyes I had ever seen. They weren't the clouded, lifeless eyes of a deceased person. They were bright, alert, and unmistakably aware. I dropped her arm and took several steps backward, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Dr. Reed," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Reed, you need to see this." He was across the room updating his notes and turned toward me with mild annoyance at being interrupted during his documentation process. "What is it, Mitch?" he asked, not looking up from his clipboard. "Her eyes are open," I said, unable to keep the tremor out of my voice. "They just opened, and she's looking at me." Dr. Reed glanced up from his notes with the patient expression of someone who has dealt with nervous assistance before. "Post-mortem eye opening is not uncommon, Sarah. Muscle relaxation and settling can cause the eyelids to open partially. It's perfectly normal." "This isn't post-mortem muscle relaxation," I insisted. "She's looking at me. Her eyes are tracking my movement." Dr. Reed set down his clipboard and walked over to the examination table with the slightly exaggerated patience of someone humoring a colleague who was having an unusual reaction to a routine case. But when he saw the woman's face, his expression changed completely. Her eyes were not only open, but were moving between Dr. Reed and me with obvious intelligence and purpose. The pupils were responding to the overhead lights, contracting and dilating as any living person's would. Most unsettling of all, there was an expression in those eyes that suggested not just consciousness, but a kind of amused awareness, as if she found our shock entertaining. "That's not possible," Dr. Reed said, more to himself than to me. He immediately reached for his stethoscope and placed it over her heart. No heartbeat. He checked for a pulse at her wrist, then her neck. Nothing. He held a small mirror under her nose to check for breath. No fogging. Every clinical indicator confirmed that this woman was deceased. Had been deceased for at least 2 days according to the scene investigation. But she was watching us with those impossibly alert green eyes, and I could swear I saw the corner of her mouth turn up slightly, as if she were trying not to smile at our confusion. "We need to call Dr. Martinez," Dr. Reed said, referring to our consulting neurologist. "I've never seen anything like this, and I want a second opinion before we proceed." Dr. Elena Martinez arrived within 30 minutes, bringing with her a portable EEG machine and additional monitoring equipment. She was a respected neurologist who consulted on cases involving brain injury and neurological causes of death. In her 15 years of practice, she had seen various unusual presentations of brain death and neurological conditions. When Dr. Martinez entered the examination room, the woman's eyes immediately shifted to focus on her. It was as if she was curious about each new person who entered her space. Dr. Martinez observed this tracking behavior for several minutes before beginning her examination. "Has she moved anything other than her eyes?" Dr. Martinez asked as she set up her equipment. "No," I replied. "Just the eye movements and what appears to be intentional focus and tracking." Dr. Martinez attached EEG electrodes to the woman's scalp and powered up her monitoring equipment. "If there's any brain activity, this will detect it," she explained. The EEG reading was completely flat. No electrical activity in the brain whatsoever. Dr. Martinez double-checked her equipment, repositioned the electrodes, and ran the test again. The result was the same. According to every medical instrument and diagnostic tool we had available, this woman was clinically dead. Her brain showed no electrical activity, her heart was not beating, she was not breathing, and her body showed the expected signs of death except for the absence of rigor mortis. Yet she continued to watch us with those penetrating green eyes, following our conversations and movements with obvious interest and awareness. "I've never encountered anything like this in my career," Dr. Martinez admitted. "The EEG shows no brain activity, which should make consciousness impossible. but the eye-tracking behavior suggests purposeful neurological function. As the morning progressed, we consulted with additional specialists by phone, describing the unusual presentation and seeking guidance on how to proceed. Every expert we spoke with expressed disbelief and requested that we document everything with video evidence, which we did. The footage clearly showed a woman with no vital signs displaying conscious eye movement and apparent awareness of her surroundings. Around noon, something even more disturbing occurred. As I was adjusting the camera angle to better capture the eye movements, the woman's lips parted slightly, and she spoke a single word in a voice that was clear, articulate, and carried a tone of gentle amusement. "Curious," she said, the words spoken so softly that I initially thought I had imagined it. But Dr. Reed and Dr. Martinez both heard it as well. And our video equipment captured the audio clearly. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Dr. Reed immediately stepped closer to the examination table, his scientific curiosity overriding his obvious discomfort with the situation. "Can you hear us?" he asked directly, speaking slowly and clearly as if addressing a patient in a hospital bed rather than a body in a morgue. The woman's eyes shifted to focus on Dr. Reed's face, and after a moment that felt like an eternity, she spoke again. "I can hear everything," she said, her voice carrying the same gentle amusement. "I've been listening to your discussions all morning, quite thorough, your examinations." Dr. Martinez grabbed her phone and immediately began dialing. "I need to contact the hospital administration and possibly the CDC. This is completely unprecedented from a medical standpoint." But before she could complete her call, the woman spoke again. "That won't be necessary, Dr. Martinez," she said, somehow knowing the neurologist's name despite never being introduced. "I won't be here much longer." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature-controlled environment of the morgue. "How do you know her name?" I asked, finding my voice despite the surreal nature of the conversation. "I know many things," the woman replied, her eyes now focused on me with an intensity that made me want to look away. "I know that you've been questioning whether this work is right for you, Sarah. You've been having dreams about leaving forensic pathology for months now." She was right. For the past 6 months, I had been waking up from dreams where I was working in a completely different field, helping living people instead of examining the deceased. I had never mentioned these thoughts to anyone at work, not even Dr. Reed, who I considered a mentor and friend. "I know that Dr. Reed has been considering early retirement because he's tired of seeing what humans do to each other," she continued. "And Dr. Martinez, you've been debating whether to move back to private practice because you miss treating patients who can actually recover." Both doctors stared at her in stunned silence. The woman somehow knew personal details about each of us that we had never shared with our colleagues. It was as if she had been observing our lives from some impossible vantage point. "Who are you?" Dr. Reed asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm someone who was given a choice," she replied cryptically. "And I chose to experience this transition differently than most people do." Dr. Martinez had stopped trying to make phone calls and was now recording everything with her phone's video camera. "What do you mean by transition?" she asked. "Death isn't what you think it is," the woman explained, her tone becoming more serious. "It's not an ending, it's a doorway. Most people pass through that doorway quickly, without looking back. But some of us are offered the opportunity to linger, to observe, to understand what we're leaving behind before we move forward." The rational part of my mind was screaming that this was impossible, that there had to be a medical explanation for what we were witnessing. But another part of me, a part I had been trying to ignore for years, recognized something profound in what she was saying. "How long have you been like this?" I asked. "Since Tuesday evening," she replied. "I was in my apartment, reading before bed, when I felt my heart stop. There was no pain, no struggle, just a sudden awareness that my body was shutting down. But instead of the darkness I expected, there was light. And a voice asking if I was ready to continue on, or if I wanted to spend a few days observing the process of death from this side." "And you chose to stay?" Dr. Reed asked. "I was curious," she said, using that word again. "I wanted to see how the living would respond to my death. I wanted to understand what happens to a body after the spirit has left it. Most importantly, I wanted to see if anyone would recognize that consciousness can exist independent of physical life signs." Dr. Martinez lowered her phone slightly. Are you suggesting that consciousness can survive clinical death? I'm not suggesting it, the woman said with a smile that was both beautiful and unsettling. I'm demonstrating it. Your instruments can't detect my consciousness because they're designed to measure biological processes. But consciousness isn't biological, Dr. Martinez. It's something far more complex and enduring than you've been taught to believe. The implications of what she was saying began to sink in. If consciousness could exist without brain activity, without heartbeat, without any of the biological markers we use to define life, then everything we thought we knew about death was incomplete. Why reveal this to us? I asked. Why not just move on to whatever comes next? Because the three of you needed to see this, she replied, looking at each of us in turn. Sarah, you've been feeling disconnected from your work because you sense there's more to existence than what you see in this morgue every day. You're right. There is infinitely more. She turned her gaze to Dr. Reed. Doctor, you've been losing faith in humanity because you see only the aftermath of violence and tragedy. But what you don't see is what happens to those souls after they leave their damaged bodies. They find peace, understanding, and forgiveness that transcends the circumstances of their deaths. Finally, she looked at Dr. Martinez. And you've been questioning whether consciousness truly originates in the brain or if the brain is simply an interface for something much larger. Today, you have your answer. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sounds of normal morgue operations continuing in other parts of the building. What this woman was telling us challenged every foundation of medical science and our understanding of life and death. Will you stay conscious like this indefinitely? Dr. Martinez asked. No, the woman replied. I can feel the pull to move forward becoming stronger. I estimate I have perhaps another hour before I'll need to make my final transition. The energy required to maintain this state of awareness while my body continues its natural decomposition process is considerable. As if responding to her words, I noticed that her skin was beginning to show more obvious signs of post-mortem changes. The translucent pallor was deepening, and there were subtle shifts in coloration that indicated the body's natural processes were continuing despite her conscious presence. What should we tell people about this? I asked. How do we document what we've witnessed? Document it exactly as it happened, she said simply. Some people will dismiss it as impossible. Others will be intrigued enough to begin asking deeper questions about the nature of consciousness and death. Both responses are necessary for human understanding to evolve. Dr. Reed had been quiet for several minutes, clearly processing everything he was witnessing. In 30 years of forensic pathology, he said slowly, I've seen every conceivable cause of death, every type of trauma, every way the human body can fail. But I've never seen anything that suggested consciousness could persist after clinical death. That's because you were looking in the wrong places, the woman replied gently. Consciousness doesn't reside in the body, Dr. Reed. The body is simply a temporary vehicle. When the vehicle stops functioning, the consciousness doesn't disappear. It transitions to a different state of existence. Then what happens to people who die violently? I asked, thinking of the countless homicide victims I had processed over the years. Do they also have this awareness after death? Every consciousness transitions in its own way, she explained. Some move forward immediately. Some linger to resolve unfinished emotional business. Some choose to observe and learn as I have. But none are truly lost or destroyed. The essence of who they were continues in ways that your current scientific understanding can't measure or detect. Dr. Martinez had started taking detailed notes while continuing to record. Are you in any discomfort? Do you feel pain or distress? There's no physical sensation at all, the woman replied. My consciousness is connected to this body, but not dependent on its biological functions. It's rather like watching a movie of my own death while simultaneously experiencing complete peace and understanding. As she spoke these words, I noticed her eye movements were becoming less frequent and her responses were taking longer. The energy she had mentioned was clearly diminishing. Is there anything specific you want us to know before you transition? Dr. Reed asked. Yes, she said, her voice becoming softer but somehow more profound. Tell people that death is not the end they fear it to be. Tell them that the love they feel for those who have passed is received and returned, even when they can't perceive it. And tell them that the consciousness that makes each person unique and precious continues beyond the failure of biological systems. She paused, and for a moment her eyes seemed to look beyond us, as if seeing something in the room that we couldn't perceive. Most importantly, she continued, tell them that the work you do here, documenting the circumstances of death, seeking truth and justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves, is sacred work. You're not just processing bodies, you're honoring the transitions of souls. Her words hit me with unexpected force. In 8 years of working in forensic pathology, I had developed what I thought was a healthy emotional detachment from the cases we processed. But hearing her describe our work as sacred made me realize that somewhere along the way, I had begun to see the deceased as just cases, just problems to be solved rather than people who had lived full lives. I need to ask you something that's been bothering me, I said, my voice barely steady. Over the years, we've had cases where families insisted their loved one was still present somehow, that they could feel them in the room during viewings or autopsies. Were they right? The woman's eyes softened, and what might have been the shadow of a smile crossed her features. More often than you know, Sarah, consciousness doesn't follow the same timeline as biological death. Some souls linger to comfort grieving families. Others stay to ensure their story is properly told. And some remain to guide the investigation into their death. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her obvious discomfort. Are you saying that some of our unsolved cases might have had assistance from the victims themselves? The Johnson case from 2 years ago, the woman said without hesitation. The elderly man found in his apartment with no obvious cause of death. You never found the medication bottle that would have explained his accidental overdose because it had rolled under his refrigerator. He tried to guide the investigators toward it, but they couldn't perceive his attempts to communicate. I felt my blood run cold. The Johnson case had haunted our office for months. We had been unable to determine a cause of death, and the family had been left without answers or closure. How could you possibly know about that case? I asked. Because Harold Johnson has been trying to tell you what happened for 2 years, she replied. He's still in your building sometimes, hoping someone will finally understand what he's trying to communicate. He accidentally took double doses of his heart medication after forgetting he had already taken his evening pills. The bottle fell and rolled under the refrigerator when he collapsed. He's been desperate for his daughter to know it wasn't suicide. Dr. Reed had gone completely pale. Are you telling us that there are other conscious entities in this building right now? Not entities, doctor. People. Souls who haven't yet completed their transition for various reasons. Some are confused about what happened to them, others are concerned about loved ones they left behind, and some are simply curious about the process, like I am. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and I found myself looking around nervously, wondering if we were being observed by presences we couldn't see. How many? I whispered. At this moment, perhaps 7 or 8 throughout the building. The number varies. Most souls don't linger long once they realize their physical bodies can no longer serve them. But some have reasons to stay, at least temporarily. Dr. Martinez was frantically scribbling notes, her scientific mind trying to process information that challenged everything she had learned in medical school. Is there any way for us to communicate with them, to help them, or help solve their cases? You're already communicating with me, the woman pointed out. But my situation is unique because I made a conscious choice to maintain this level of awareness. The others are in different states of transition. Some might be able to influence physical objects slightly. Others might be able to implant thoughts or feelings in sensitive individuals. But direct communication like this is extremely rare. I thought about all the times over the years when I had felt inexplicably drawn to re-examine certain evidence, or when I had sudden insights about cases that seemed to come from nowhere. The Morrison homicide last year, I said slowly. I kept feeling like I needed to look at the victim's phone records again, even though we had already gone through them thoroughly. When I finally did, I found the deleted text messages that led to the arrest. Jennifer Morrison was very persistent, the woman confirmed. She knew her ex-boyfriend had threatened her the night before her death, but the messages had been deleted from her phone. She spent weeks trying to get someone to look deeper into the phone's data recovery possibilities. Dr. Reed sat down heavily in a nearby chair, his face showing the strain of trying to process revelations that contradicted decades of medical training and experience. If what you're telling us is true, then our entire approach to forensic investigation might need to be reconsidered. Not reconsidered, Dr. Reed, expanded. Everything you do now is still valid and necessary. But imagine how much more effective your investigations could be if you acknowledged that sometimes the victims themselves are trying to help you find the truth. As she spoke, I noticed that her voice was becoming fainter, and the intervals between her words were growing longer. The energy she had mentioned was clearly fading, and I realized we were witnessing something that might never happen again in our lifetimes. Before you go, I said urgently, is there anything we can do for the others who are still here? The souls who haven't moved on? Acknowledge them, she replied, her voice now barely above a whisper. When you're working on a case, speak to the person whose body you're examining. Tell them what you're doing and why. Let them know you're seeking justice or answers on their behalf. Many of them just need to know that someone cares about finding the truth. Dr. Martinez looked up from her notes. Will we ever see evidence like this again? Will other people experience what we're experiencing today? Consciousness is evolving, Dr. Martinez. As human beings become more open to possibilities beyond traditional scientific understanding, more phenomena like this will be witnessed and documented. You three were chosen to see this because your minds are open enough to accept it, and your positions allow you to share what you've learned with others who need to know. Chosen by whom? Dr. Reed asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. By the same intelligence that guides all transitions from physical existence to whatever comes next. Some call it God, others call it universal consciousness. Still others refer to it as the source of all existence. The label doesn't matter. What matters is that there is an organizing principle behind all of this, and sometimes it intervenes in ways that challenge human understanding. Her eyes were beginning to lose their sharp focus, and I could see that she was preparing for her final transition. Is there anything you want us to tell your family? I asked quickly. Tell them that I'm at peace and that I understand now why my life unfolded exactly as it did. Tell them that the love we shared continues beyond physical separation and that I'll be waiting for them when their time comes to make their own transitions. What was your name? Dr. Martinez asked softly. In that life, I was called Rebecca Chen, she replied. I was a teacher at the elementary school on Magnolia Avenue. I loved working with children because their minds are still open to possibilities that adults have forgotten. Rebecca Chen. I made a mental note to find out more about her life, to understand who this remarkable woman had been before she became our most extraordinary case. One final thing, Rebecca said, her voice now so faint we had to lean close to hear her. Don't let what you've witnessed today make you afraid of death. Fear of death keeps people from fully living. Death is simply a doorway to a broader existence, one where consciousness is freed from the limitations of physical form. Her eyes began to close slowly, and for a moment I thought we were losing her. But then they opened once more, brighter than they had been all day, as if she was drawing on some final reserve of energy. The work you do here matters more than you know, she said with sudden clarity. Every person whose death you investigate, every case you solve, every family you give answers to, it all contributes to the greater understanding of what it means to be human. Don't lose sight of that purpose. With those words, her eyes closed gently, and this time, they didn't reopen. The strange alertness that had defied every medical explanation was gone, leaving behind what appeared to be a normal deceased body, showing the expected signs of post-mortem changes. Dr. Reed checked for vital signs once more, though we all knew what he would find. No pulse, no breathing, no response to stimuli. The EEG that Dr. Martinez had left connected showed the flat line we had seen all morning. By every medical standard, Rebecca Chen was now truly, completely deceased. But the room felt different somehow, emptier, as if something essential had departed. The three of us stood in silence for several minutes, each trying to process what we had just experienced. We need to discuss how we're going to document this, Dr. Martinez said finally, breaking the silence. We have video evidence, audio recordings, and 3 professional witnesses, but I'm not sure any medical journal will publish a case report about a conscious corpse. Maybe that's not the point, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Maybe we're not supposed to convince the entire medical community right away. Maybe we're just supposed to plant seeds, to start conversations, to make people think about possibilities they hadn't considered before. Dr. Reed nodded slowly. We document everything exactly as it happened. We present the evidence objectively and let others draw their own conclusions. But more importantly, we change how we approach our work here. What do you mean? Dr. Martinez asked. I mean, we start talking to them, I said, understanding immediately what Dr. Reed was suggesting. Every person whose case we investigate, we acknowledge their presence, their humanity, their desire for justice or closure. We treat them as individuals who may still be aware on some level, not just as biological evidence to be processed. The idea felt both radical and completely natural. For years, I had maintained professional detachment as a way of protecting myself from the emotional weight of the work. But Rebecca had shown us that this detachment might be preventing us from being as effective as we could be. I need to call Detective Santos, Dr. Reed said, referring to the investigator who had worked Rebecca's scene. She needs to know that this wasn't a typical natural death case, even if we can't fully explain what made it unusual. As Dr. Reed made his phone call, Dr. Martinez and I began the process of completing Rebecca's examination and preparing her body for release to her family. But everything felt different now. Instead of working in clinical silence, I found myself speaking quietly to Rebecca, explaining what we were doing and why. We're going to take good care of you, Rebecca, I said as we prepared to move her body to cold storage. We're going to make sure your family knows that your passing was peaceful and that you wanted them to understand you're at peace. I didn't expect any response, and there wasn't one in any conventional sense, but I could swear I felt a subtle sense of gratitude in the room, a feeling of acknowledgement that somehow our words had been received and appreciated. Dr. Martinez noticed my changed behavior, but didn't comment on it. Instead, she began doing something I had never seen her do before. She placed her hand gently on Rebecca's forehead and spoke directly to her. Thank you for showing us what you showed us today, Rebecca. It changes everything about how I understand consciousness and death. I promise we'll use this knowledge to help others. When Detective Santos arrived an hour later to discuss the case, we presented her with our findings in carefully measured terms. We explained that Rebecca had died of apparent natural causes, likely cardiac arrest, but that there had been some unusual aspects to the case that we were still investigating. What kind of unusual aspects? Detective Santos asked, her experienced instincts picking up on our carefully chosen words. Dr. Reed and I exchanged glances. We had agreed to be truthful but selective about what we shared, at least initially. The deceased showed some atypical post-mortem presentations that we're documenting for possible publication in forensic journals, Dr. Reed explained. Nothing that affects the cause of death determination, but phenomena that might be of interest to other forensic professionals. Detective Santos studied our faces carefully. She had worked with us for years and could clearly sense that something significant had happened, but she didn't push for details. Will this affect my report or the information I give to the family? No, I assured her. As far as your investigation is concerned, this was a natural death with no suspicious circumstances. The family can be told that Rebecca died peacefully in her sleep, which is essentially accurate. After Detective Santos left, the 3 of us sat in the break room, drinking coffee and trying to integrate what we had experienced into our understanding of reality. The normal sounds of the morgue continued around us, phones ringing, equipment humming, colleagues discussing routine cases. But we felt fundamentally changed by our encounter with Rebecca Chen. I keep thinking about what she said about the other souls in the building, Dr. Martinez said quietly. Do you think we'll be able to sense them now that we know they might be here? I don't know, I admitted. But I think we should try. At minimum, we should start acknowledging the possibility in how we approach our cases. Dr. Reed had been unusually quiet since Rebecca's final transition. In 30 years of this work, he said finally, I've seen death in every conceivable form. But I've never seen anything that suggested it wasn't truly final. Today changed that. Are you having doubts about the experience? Dr. Martinez asked. Are you wondering if we somehow misinterpreted what happened? No, Dr. Reed said firmly. We have too much documentation, too many witnesses, too many specific details that we couldn't have known otherwise. What happened today was real, even if it challenges everything we thought we knew about the boundary between life and death. I realized that Rebecca had been right about each of us. I had been questioning my career in forensic pathology, feeling disconnected from work that once gave me purpose. Dr. Reed had been considering retirement, worn down by years of witnessing the worst of human behavior. Dr. Martinez had been debating a return to private practice, missing the interaction with living patients. But now, everything felt different. The work we did here wasn't just about processing bodies and determining causes of death. We were part of a larger system of justice, truth-seeking, and ultimately, honoring the transitions that every human being must eventually make. I think I need to visit the Johnson file, I said suddenly. If Harold Johnson is still trying to communicate about his case, maybe we can help him find peace. Dr. Martinez nodded. And I want to review some of our unsolved cases from a different perspective. If Rebecca was right about victims sometimes trying to guide investigations, there might be evidence we've overlooked because we weren't considering that possibility. Dr. Reed stood up, looking more energized than I had seen him in months. We need to establish new protocols, he said. Ways to document and investigate cases that acknowledge the possibility of continued consciousness. It won't be easy to get administrative approval, but today proves we need to expand our investigative methods. As we prepared to return to our regular duties, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from my work for years. Rebecca Chen had given us more than just an impossible demonstration of consciousness surviving clinical death. She had given us a new understanding of why our work mattered and how we could do it more effectively. The afternoon brought two new cases, a car accident victim and an elderly man who had died at home, and I approached both with a completely different mindset than I had ever used before. Instead of simply processing evidence and documenting findings, I spoke to both individuals who would seek truth and justice on their behalf. Explaining what we were doing and assuring them that we didn't expect responses, and I didn't receive any obvious ones. But somehow, the work felt more meaningful, more connected to the fundamental human experience of life, death, and the mystery of consciousness that bridges both states. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I stopped by the cold storage unit where Rebecca's body was waiting for her family to make final arrangements. I stood quietly for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. "Thank you, Rebecca," I said softly. "You've changed how I understand this work and what it means to be truly alive." I didn't hear a response, but I left the building that night feeling more connected to my purpose than I had in years. Rebecca Chen had shown us that death wasn't the end we had always believed it to be, and that knowledge would change how I approached every case for the rest of my career. But as the weeks passed, I began to realize that Rebecca's gift came with a price. Once you've seen consciousness persist beyond clinical death, once you've witnessed the impossible and documented the unexplainable, it becomes very difficult to return to a worldview where death is simply the cessation of biological function. Every I found night when I went home, myself lying awake thinking about the implications of what we had witnessed. If Rebecca could maintain consciousness after death, if Harold Johnson was still trying to solve his own case, if there were 7 or 8 souls wandering our building at any given time, then what did that mean for every family I'd ever told that their loved one was gone forever? The questions multiplied in my mind like a virus. How many grieving parents had I spoken to over the years, assuring them that their child felt no pain, that death had been instantaneous, when perhaps, idly trying to comfort their son or daughter, had been to spear them from just beyond the veil of perception? How many cases had we closed prematurely because we couldn't hear the victim trying to tell us what really happened? Dr. Reed noticed the change in my behavior almost immediately. I started spending extra time with each body that came through our facility, speaking quietly to them as I worked, explaining procedures, asking questions I knew might never be answered in conventional ways. My documentation became more detailed, more personal. Instead of writing, "Subject appears to be a 34-year-old Hispanic male," I found myself writing, "This is Miguel Rodriguez, age 34, who worked as a landscaper and coached Little League on weekends." "You're anthropomorphizing the deceased," Dr. Reed observed one morning as he reviewed my reports. But his tone wasn't critical. If anything, he sounded curious about my new approach. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe I'm finally treating them like the people they still are on some level we don't understand. Dr. Reed had been making his own changes since. He had started Rebecca's visit occurrences during exam. He documented unusual to private journal whereinations, strange feelings of being watched, moments when evidence seemed to present itself in unexpected ways. He never mentioned this journal to administration, but he shared some of his observations with Dr. Martinez and me during our informal meetings. Yesterday's drowning victim from Lake Matthews, he told us during one of these sessions. 22-year-old college student named David Park. His family insisted he was and never have gone into the lake excellent swimmer, that he would alone at night. The investigating officers found no evidence of foul play. What made it unusual? Dr. Martinez asked. During the examination, I kept feeling drawn to look more closely at a small mark on his wrist. Initially, I dismissed it as post-mortem lividity, but something kept nagging at me to photograph it from different angles. When I enhanced the images, it clearly showed finger-shaped bruising consistent with someone grabbing his wrist force. Did you share that findings fully? I felt a chill run down my spine, reopening the case ASD. They're with the detectives. ID a possible homicide. But here's what bothers me. I've examined hundreds of drowning victims over the years. I know what to look for. Why did I almost miss that bruising? Carefully. Feel comp, and why did I suddenly to look more leaned forward? Are Dr. Martinez, you suggesting that David Park guided your attention to evidence of his murder? I'm not suggesting anything, Dr. Reed replied carefully. I'm just documenting that since Rebecca's case, I've noticed that we couldn't shared patterns in my investigative process that I can conventional forensic easily explain through training. With anyone else in safe space to discuss experiences, weekly meetings became similar incidents. Sudden led to discoveries of inexplicable urges to order insights during brain examinations that the building. Dr. Martinez report previously undetected trauma during autopsies when additional tests that revealed crucial information. Moments she felt an almost overwhelming sense of urgency to focus on specific areas of injury. The psychiatric patient who died at Riverside General last month, she shared during one meeting. Official cause of death was listed as suicide by overdose, but during the brain examination, I felt compelled to look unforced trauma, even though there for signs of Beale. Did you find anything? I asked. Were no external injuries to suggest it. Subtle hemorrhaging in the frontal lobe that could have been caused by a blow to the head. The injury wouldn't have been immediately fatal, but it might have caused disorientation or impaired judgment that contributed to the overdose. I reported it to the hospital, and they discovered security footage showing incidents were accumulating too frequently to dismiss the patient being assaulted by another patient. Several were all experiencing a height hours before his death. What in? These as coincidence. Weaned sensitivity to details we might have previously overlooked, guided by intuitions that seemed to come from beyond our own professional experience. But the most disturbing development was what happened when I decided to investigate Harold Johnson's case more thoroughly. Rebecca had mentioned that he was still trying to communicate about the medication bottle that had fallen under his refrigerator, desperate for his daughter to know his death wasn't suicide. I pulled the Johnson file and reviewed every detail of the case. Harold Johnson, 73 years old, found dead in his apartment by his daughter after she became concerned when he didn't answer his phone for 2 days. Not been searched thoroughly, but no medication bottles, obvious cause of death, no signs of struggle, no suicide note. The apartment high were found that could explain medication for his heart condition, but investigators his death. According to the file, Harold's daughter had mentioned that her father took about whether Harold might have intent, had been unable to locate any prescription bottles in the apartment. This absence of medication had contributed to the inconclusive nature of the case to visit the apartment building where Harold had lived. The unit and the family's lingering questions shouldn't ended his life. I decided had been rented to new tenants, but I spoke with the property manager about getting access to check behind and under appliances. I explained that we were conducting a follow-up investigation on an unresolved death case. The current tenants were cooperative when I explained the situation. They allowed me to move their refrigerator and search the area behind and beneath it. Within minutes, I found what Harold had been trying to tell us about for 2 years: a prescription bottle that had rolled far under the appliance, invisible from any normal viewing angle. The bottle contained Harold's heart medication, and the remaining pill count confirmed that he had accidentally taken a double dose on the night of his death. The prescription label showed it had been filled 3 days before his death, and the number of missing pills indicated he had been taking his medication as prescribed until that final, fatal mistake. I immediately called Harold's daughter to inform her of the discovery. The relief in her voice was overwhelming. I knew tears. He was looking Dad wouldn't kill himself, she said through forward to my daughter's graduation next month. He had already bought his plane ticket to come visit us. But as I stood in Harold's former apartment, holding the medication bottle that had caused 2 years of unnecessary grief for his family, I experienced something that made me question my own sanity. For just a moment, I could swear I felt a presence in the room with me, not threatening or frightening, but profoundly grateful. The temperature seemed to shift the distinct subtly, and I had the impression that someone was standing just behind my left shoulder. When I turned to look, no one was there. But the feeling of gratitude remained so strong it brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Harold," I whispered to the empty room. "I hope this gives you peace." The feeling of presence faded gradually, leaving me standing alone in the apartment with nothing but the evidence bottle and the certainty that I had just experienced something that defied every scientific principle I had ever learned. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Harold Johnson, about Rebecca Chen, about David Park and all the other souls who might be trying to communicate with us from whatever realm exists beyond clinical death. The implications were staggering, and consciousness could survive terrifying. If the deceased, the death of the body, could somehow influence physical events and guide investigations, then death wasn't the final boundary we had always believed it to be. But more unsettling than that possibility was the question of what they trapped. These souls experienced while they lingered between worlds. Were they suffering? Were they confused about their state of existence? Rebecca had seemed peaceful and purposeful, but what about the others? What about people who died violently or unexpectedly, who might not understand what had happened to them? I started researching near-death experiences, out-of-body phenomena, and documented cases of after-death communication. The literature was vast and varied, ranging from rigorous scientific studies to anecdotal accounts that could easily be dismissed as wishful thinking or psychological coping mechanisms. But within this research, I found patterns that aligned with what we had experienced. Reports from medical professionals who described patients displaying impossible knowledge during cardiac arrest, families who received specific information from deceased relatives that later proved accurate, investigators who solved cold cases after experiencing unexplained insights or guidance. The more I read, the more I realize that Rebecca's demonstration wasn't as unique as we had initially believed. Similar phenomena had been documented throughout history, but they were typically dismissed by the medical establishment as hallucinations, coincidences, or misinterpretations of natural events. Dr. Martinez had been conducting her own research and reached similar conclusions. There's a significant body of evidence suggesting that consciousness can exist independent of brain function, she told me during one of our meetings. But it's been marginalized by mainstream science because it challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. So why aren't more medical professionals acknowledging these possibilities? I asked. Because it would require admitting that our current understanding of consciousness, death, and the nature of existence is incomplete, Dr. Reed interjected. That's a difficult thing for any professional to accept, especially when it challenges the foundation of their expertise. But we were being forced to accept it whether we were comfortable with it or not. The evidence was accumulating beyond our ability to rationalize it away. We were encountering phenomena that demanded explanation, and the traditional medical model wasn't providing adequate answers. The breaking point came 6 weeks after Rebecca's case, when we received what appeared to be a routine overdose victim. 26-year-old Maria Santos, found deceased in her apartment by her roommate. Initial scene investigations suggested accidental overdose, possibly involving prescription medications mixed with alcohol. But from the moment Maria's body arrived at our facility, something felt different. The air in the examination room seemed charged with an energy I couldn't identify. and I found myself feeling increasingly agitated as we began the preliminary examination. During the external examination, I kept experiencing vivid mental images that seemed to come from nowhere. Flashes of Maria's apartment didn't recognize, a man's face. I struggle that wasn't reflected in the physical evidence we were documenting. Are you all right, Sarah? Dr. Reed asked, noticing my distraction. I keep seeing things, I admitted, feeling foolish but unable to dismiss the intensity of the mental images. Scenes from what might have happened to her. But they don't match what we're finding during the examination. Dr. Reed paused his documentation and looked at me carefully. What kind of scenes? A man forcing pills down her throat. A struggle in her bedroom. Maria trying to fight him off but being overpowered. But there are no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle, no indication of forced ingestion. Dr. Martinez joined our conversation. Since Rebecca's case, we've all been experiencing heightened intuitions about our cases. Maybe we should take these impressions seriously rather than dismissing them. I described the mental images in detail. The man's appearance, the layout of Maria's apartment as sequence of events that seemed to be playing, I was seeing it. The specific in my mind, like a movie I hadn't chosen to watch. Dr. Reed made notes of everything I described, then called Detective Santos to request a more thorough investigation of Maria's apartment and background. We're finding some inconsistencies in the preliminary findings, he told her. We need to rule out the possibility of foul play before we can determine cause of death. The reinvestigation of Maria's apartment revealed evidence that had been missed during the initial scene processing. Hidden behind a dresser, investigators found several pills that matched the medication found in Maria's system. The pills showed clear signs of having been crushed and possibly dissolved in liquid. More significantly, when detectives interviewed Maria's neighbors based on the physical description I had provided from my mental images, they identify on the night of her death. Security, a man who had been seen leaving Maria's building footage from a nearby business, confirmed his presence in the area at the estimated time of death. Within a week, the man was arrested and eventually confessed to forcing Maria to ingest a lethal combination of her prescription medications dissolved in alcohol. He had been her ex-boyfriend, stalking her for months after she ended their relationship. The murder had been carefully planned to look like an accidental overdose, but the confession came too late to prevent me from reaching a psychological breaking point. The mental images I had experienced during Maria's examination had been so vivid, so emotionally intense, that I felt like I had witnessed her murder firsthand. The trauma of experiencing her final moments, even secondhand through whatever impossible means, left me shaken in ways I couldn't explain to anyone. I started having nightmares about Maria's death, about Rebecca's impossible consciousness, about Harold Johnson wandering the halls of our building trying to solve his own case. Sleep became elusive, and when I did manage to rest, I was haunted by dreams of souls trapped between worlds, desperate to communicate with the living but unable to make themselves understood. The work that had once given me purpose now felt like a burden I couldn't bear. Every body that came through our facility might be conscious on some level, might be trying to tell us something crucial about their death, might be suffering in ways we couldn't comprehend or alleviate. I don't think I can do this anymore, I told Dr. Reed during what would be our final meeting. Knowing what I know now, seeing what I've seen, I can't process another case without wondering if I'm missing something vital, if I'm failing someone who's counting on me to find the truth. Dr. Reed nodded with understanding that went beyond professional sympathy. I've been having similar thoughts, he admitted. This knowledge changes everything about how we approach death investigation. It makes the work both more meaningful and more difficult. What are we supposed to do with what we've learned? I asked. How do we function in a system that doesn't acknowledge the possibility of post-mortem consciousness? How do we help souls who might be trapped between worlds when we don't even have language to describe what we've experienced? Maybe that's why Rebecca chose us, Dr. Martinez suggested. Maybe we're supposed to be the ones who start developing that language, who begin documenting these phenomena in ways that other medical professionals can understand and accept. But I had reached my limit. The psychological weight of knowing that consciousness might persist after death, that the deceased might be aware of their condition and desperately trying to communicate, was more than I could bear while continuing to work in forensic pathology. 3 months later, I submitted my resignation and moved to a small town in Oregon where I now work as a grief counselor. I help families process loss, and sometimes I share what I learned about consciousness and death, though I'm careful about how much I reveal. The work feels right in ways that forensic pathology never did after Rebecca showed us the truth. Dr. Reed retired early and Dr. Martinez returned to private practice, but we stay in touch. We still document unusual experiences, still research consciousness studies, still wonder about the souls who might be trying to reach us from beyond clinical death. Sometimes I think about Rebecca Chen, about Harold Johnson finally finding peace, about Maria Santos getting the justice she deserved. Death isn't what any of us thought it was. That knowledge terrified me enough to leave my career, but it also gave me something invaluable. The certainty that consciousness continues beyond the failure of our physical bodies. That's both the most frightening and most comforting truth I've ever encountered.